Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's start with a little music. About what? Owls, of course. Some of them hoot, some of them holler, some even screech and wail. They've got great big eyes and heads and rounded tails. They sit up in the trees and make funny sounds. So you and me, I'm talking about those owls. Some are big, some are little, but all of them are strong. They're predator birds that sing a different song. If you're a little bitty mouse or a great big rat, better be careful just where you're at, 'cause I'm talking about those owls. They fly by night upon a silent wing, just like a ghost. They can be a spooky thing. In the blink of an eye, they can be there and gone. You're lucky to see one for very long. And with talons needle sharp, deadly weapons on the move, eyes that pierce the darkness as they fly across the moon. Searching every piece of ground, they're an incredible sight. It's no wonder we call them masters of the night. Some of them hoot, some of them holler, some even screech and wail. They've got great big eyes and heads and rounded tails. They sit up in the trees, make funny sounds. You and me, I'm talking about those owls. I'm talking about those owls. I'm talking about those owls. Okay, thank you very much. And let's meet some owls. So once again, my name is Carlton. I'm a local naturalist and educator. I actually live up the mountain, so to speak, up towards the Hendersonville, Brevard area. If you go up the mountain above us here. So it took me about 45 minutes or so to get here. And I always like to say I'm a naturalist, and I always like to explain what a naturalist is. By the way, this chair is now available. Who wants it? I'll just put it over here, first grab, first serve. Okay, because I don't need it anymore. And does anybody here know what a naturalist is? What is a naturalist? Nobody knows? Well, I'm going to clue you in. A naturalist is somebody who studies and enjoys nature. So you may be a naturalist, you just didn't know what you were called. Okay, but I'm also like a teacher naturalist, that I get invited to go to places and visit with people and kind of share my knowledge of nature with folks that want to learn a little bit more. And evidently enough people here want to learn a little bit more about our subject today, owls, masters of the night, because we've got a nice big crowd here. So we're going to be taking some owls out. I'll probably stay mostly in this vicinity right here, because this is such a nice room with such a nice carpet, and owls sometimes, well, they poop. They do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it, and sometimes when a wild creature sees a human being, the first thing you think is, you know, that's one of the defenses. So this could get a little bit messy, so we'll probably try to stay here. But if we get off the carpet and we have a little issue, we'll clean it up a little bit later, okay? All right, so I brought 3 different owls to visit with you this afternoon. They're all kind of covered up here. Brought some other things about owls we'll be talking about. And so we'll get to see some live owls. And, you know, a lot of times I ask the audience ahead of time, how many people have ever actually been outside and actually spotted and seen an owl in a wild? Can you raise your hand? You know, in most crowds I talk to, sometimes half or sometimes 1/3 of the people say, yeah, they've actually seen an owl. Raise your hand if you've heard an owl, because owls can be very vocal. So even more people probably have heard an owl. But to actually get a glimpse of an owl is kind of a rare and occasional thing for the average person, because they are creatures of the night, what I call masters of the night, because they're so good at coming out when the sun goes down and when it's dark outside. And we human beings are creatures of the daytime. And we feel a little bit uneasy sometimes at night. You know, we don't see very well in the dark. We imagine all these things are moving in the dark, something's going to hurt us, you know. And so we think that things that move around on a daily basis in the darkness are kind of mysterious creatures. And they are kind of mysterious. They have unusual ways of finding their prey and escaping their enemies and vocalizing and talking and communicating with each other. And owls are right there at the very top of some of the interesting creatures that come out when the sun goes down. So we're going to talk about these owls, learn a little bit about them. And also, as I take the owls out, something you need to know. First of all, owls are highly protected by law, because they are a member of what we call the birds of prey. Birds of prey are also called raptors. And raptors are birds that are predatory birds that hunt other animals for a living. So they're powerful, they're swift, they're strong, and like many other birds out there, they're actually protected by law. In fact, it is against the law to even have a feather of one of those, believe it or not, unless you have special permits and that sort of thing. They're protected by the federal government and the state government, and I have to have special permits just to bring them here to see you today, okay? But it was once a time when birds of prey were not protected like many other animals, and if you wanted to shoot one, you could. People would do that because sometimes they wanted a pretty feather like this, or sometimes they're afraid that thing might attack something that like them, particularly big things like eagles. Some people would be afraid of things like that. And they used to think that predatory creatures were actually bad to have around. So people would shoot them, either because they didn't like them or to get their feathers and that sort of thing. And their numbers started to plummet. And it was not only birds of prey like hawks, owls, eagles, falcons, all those things are birds of prey or raptors. It was other birds as well, things like waterfowl, like egrets and herons and things like that, and even little small things like hummingbirds. People would shoot just to get their pretty feathers, or sometimes just to see if they could shoot it. In fact, some of the old books have pictures of people shooting hawks, and they have literally piles of dozens and hundreds of dead hawks in a pile where they would shoot them as they migrated in the fall of the year, heading south. And if that sort of stuff had kept up now, many owls would probably be extinct. But as is now, many owls are much more common than they used to be, and we get to see them or at least hear them from time to time, but they are still highly protected by law. So it's against the law to harm one, possess one, have a feather of one, and many other things. In fact, if you find even a dead one, you're not even allowed to take it to a taxidermist and say, mount this for me so I can have something to put on my wall. It's dead already, but that's against the law too, because there's no way of proving that you didn't hurt that bird to get it. So it seems a little silly to not be able to own a feather. And probably a lot of us are closet criminals that have a feather tucked away somewhere of a hawk or an owl, or even something like a cardinal, a bluebird. Technically, they're protected by law too, their feathers and things. But nobody's going to say much about any of those things. But there are some birds like eagles and things that there's even a black market trade in getting the feathers. Some people think eagle feathers and owl feathers and some of these birds of prey have power in them. They're willing to do anything to get their feathers, including shooting them. So just know that all these birds are protected by law, and they're here under special permit. And also the birds that I show you today, there's something wrong with them. Now, it may not be something that's easily seen, but the reason they're here is because they can't be there out in the wild, because that's where they should be. But birds of prey that are normally kept in captivity under permit are usually birds that cannot be released back into the wild for some reason. And part of the reason I have these is the story of owls and how we relate to owls and where they live and all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about the specific thing about each bird after we talk and take it out and learn a little bit about its life cycle, where it lives, and that kind of stuff, and interesting details. We'll talk about each of the birds, why that particular bird is here and not out in the wild where it should be. Okay, so we're going to start off. There's, how many types of owls do you think you would find around, say, like around North and South Carolina, this general area you're in? How many do you think there's 2 or 3 dozen or 100 types, or 5 or 2 or 1, or how many do you think are around here? Yeah, not very many, just a handful. Just a handful. There are dozens and dozens of songbird species and dozens of shorebirds and other things, but there's only like a handful of owl species, and most of them are here year-round. There's a couple that are a little bit migratory, like some other birds, but kind of rarely, and sometimes we have a couple of types that come here that come down from the north. But generally speaking, the owls that you see are here pretty much year-round. And some owls are very common, others are just less commonly seen, but it depends on the habitat that you live in, okay? So we're going to start off with an owl that is a creature, type of owl that is a species that you're likely to see more than any other owl around here probably, okay? And I have to warn you, it's a powerful predator with needle-sharp, what we call talons, sharp beak. Are you ready for such a creature? Okay. Well, notice I'm putting on a glove. But notice my glove is not that big, because this particular owl is not that big either. A lot of times when we think of birds of prey, or even owls or other species like that, we think that they're all really huge, powerful, and sometimes they are. And we'll see a couple of bigger ones here in a moment. But I like to start off with one that's a little bit smaller, but I like to call it a pint-sized predator. This is a very powerful thing. And he does have needle-sharp talons there, which we call the claws. and it's a very efficient predator, but it doesn't look very intimidating, does it? It's very small. But this little creature here is a powerful predator and eats almost anything it can catch, including other birds. They've been known to eat earthworms. They eat a lot of bugs, a lot of insects, little mice. Anything that hops, flies, swims, or crawls could be caught by an owl of a certain species. And this type, which is called a screech owl, is probably the most common owl that we have in our area. Okay? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to move this out of the way so some people can see a little bit better. These things up on the stands here, these are owl flying silhouettes, and life size. So obviously, doesn't match up to this, does it? But if you were to see this owl flying across the sky, this is what its silhouette would look like right here. So it looks a lot bigger in flight. And birds are like that, but particularly owls. You know, sometimes people will say they saw this big owl and it was on the ground and it stood this tall, and probably didn't really stand tall. But you know, they'll fluff their feathers out and they'll stand way up on their hind legs, and they look a lot bigger than they are. What's funny about screech owls is if they're frightened about something, they pull their feathers in, they close their eyes, there's little squints, and they pull their bodies down like that, and they look really, really tiny. But then sometimes they fluff their feathers out and they look bigger. And right now he's kind of in an in-between mood. So a lot of times this bird looks a lot bigger than it is now. But this is an average size thing, about the size of my fist, my palm of my hand. And it's called a screech owl. And because it is a smaller owl, it's a kind of an owl that often lives close to human beings because they can live in a habitat that's not very big. So even if you live within the city limits of a town somewhere, and you just have a few trees out back and some brush or something, chances are you probably have a screech owl there. You may never see it, because owls are very good about hiding and not being noticed, but it's probably there. But a lot of times we hear owls because they make vocalizations in the dark to communicate with each other. And if the young are being raised by a parent or two, then they're going to communicate back and forth. You hear all kinds of sounds. But what kind of a sound do you think an owl makes? Now, don't make it yet. I'm going to ask you to demonstrate here. But you know, first of all, I have to tell you, not all owls make the same kind of sound. But with that said, what do you think most people think an owl sounds like? On the count of three, give me your best owl call imitation. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'm hearing lots of hoots out there. And that's good, because that's what I expected you to do. But guess what? Most of our owls don't hoot. I think most people think all owls hoot because they watch too much TV. And if you watch TV, whether it's a TV commercial or a movie or something, they have a night scene. They always show the night scene with a full moon, clouds passing over, maybe a few stars in the sky. You hear the howling of a coyote or a wolf or something to set the mood. You'll hear crickets chirping, and then inevitably you'll hear an owl. Woo, 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 woo. And that is an owl that lives around here. We'll talk more about that in a little bit later. But not all owls sound like that. And this one definitely doesn't. In fact, do you see what he did when I made that sound? Did he change his... He looks like, uh-oh. He's a little nervous because the sound I made was an owl that's much bigger than he is. And he's starting to say, uh-oh, I could be eaten. I don't know what I should, you know, getting a little nervous there. So, but he doesn't hoot. But you might hear his sound if you go out on an evening sometime when the wind's not too much and it's kind of quiet, particularly in early spring, but sometimes you'll hear it almost any time. But it's kind of actually a little mournful wailing sound. Sounds more like a little whinnying sound or something. And sometimes they back that up with a little trill, what we call a tremolo, a little trilling, little sound like that. And sometimes they'll make little cat-like meows and other weird little noises. Owls makes a really strange sound. But this owl almost never, if ever, screeches. So why they call them screech owls, I don't know. But this is called an eastern screech owl. And there is a western screech owl. So there are other screech owl species in the world or other parts of our country. Here in the eastern United States, it's a good old little eastern screech owl, and this is the average size one. But also males are a little smaller than the females, and we think this one, which we call big little red rather, is probably a female, but we don't know for sure. But usually they look pretty much the same, but just the males are a little smaller than the females. But sometimes the owl fluffs up really big and it looks like a big female, and other times it looks like a little male because it pulls its feathers in. So there's no way of telling absolutely for sure, because both the males and the females call, and they both take care of the young and that sort of stuff. But what's interesting about screech owls, like I said, they live close to people. They make these funny little wailing sounds. By the way, does that sound like a mournful sound? a little bit. In fact, you know, a couple years ago, I went over to the Cherokee Indian Reservation. I don't know if you know where that is, over in the mountains here, west North Carolina. And I was going over to do a program about birds of prey. So I was bringing hawks and things like that as well. And I was specifically asked not to bring a screech owl. Because in their culture, a screech owl is a sign of bad luck and a bad omen. In fact, they don't even think screech owls are owls. They think there's some kind of witch or shapeshifter or something like that. And because they sometimes are near human habitations, they sit in a tree and they go, woo, woo, that kind of a mournful wailing sound. They just think it's something like something weird and not normal, and it's not even an owl that might change in some other shape. And they just see it as a bad omen, and they think it's bad luck. So I wasn't even allowed to bring a screech owl. In fact, they don't like other owls very much either, but specifically the screech owl has some bad connotations in the Cherokee culture. So that's kind of interesting. But this is what we call a red color phase variety of a screech owl, but they come in more than one flavor, so to speak. Let me show you a picture of what some screech owls look like. Some screech owls will be gray like this. So the red or browns are replaced by gray. So we have what we call the red color variety or red phase, and we have the other called the gray phase or gray color variety. But whatever they are born, they stay that color their entire life. Except baby owls are always fluffy white. And by the way, right now I've been getting a lot of phone calls from people because I am what we call a wildlife rehabilitator. So I'm on the list that calls about animals that are injured or orphaned. I have special permits that allow me to work with them. And I've been getting lots of calls lately about little baby owls, particularly little screech owls that are on the ground. And people look around, they just don't see their mother. They just see this little thing smaller than my fist, all fluffy and white, you know, and they're very concerned about it, which I can understand. But owls like this actually live in a tree cavity of a dead tree somewhere. And right before they're able to fledge and fly and kind of do like the adult owls do, they sometimes jump out of the nest before they have all their adult feathers yet. They're still a little fluffy, and they're sitting on the ground. And people come home and find them, and they think that they need to take them home and care for them if they're hurt or they're abandoned. Almost never is that the case. We call them branchers at that point in time, because a lot of times they're on low branches, but it could be on the ground. And the parents, which are usually two, will be taking care of those little babies and flying back and forth, bringing them food. But we see them on the ground, we think we need to grab them and take them home and help them. Don't do it. Just leave them right where they're at, okay? So that's something that's happening right now with screech owls, okay? So they come in a red and gray variety. They're not a very big owl, live very, very close to people. And they have an unusual feature here that it's a little hard to see right now, so I'm going to accentuate it a little bit. Some owls have these little things that stick up on their heads, and some people refer to them as horns. Some people refer to them as ears, but they're neither one. If you were studying birds and you want to use a scientific term, you would call them plumicorns. Plumicorns. They're just feathers that stick up, and we don't really know what purpose they have, except that maybe they help break up the outline of an owl, so when he's sitting in somewhere, he's kind of hidden instead of being so rounded or square looking or something like that. But also, I've noticed it kind of indicates their mood a little bit. So if they're just kind of alert, they're up, kind of like a dog's ears are, but if they're laid back, that means that they're scared about something, kind of frightened and all. So, ooh, he's really watching some folks here. Look at that. Yeah. And screech owls have these usually yellowish eyes, or sometimes a have a little bluish tint to them, particularly when they're young. But they're just a neat little owl. But they're not even the smallest owl we have around here. Just so you'll know, there's another owl. Now, you wouldn't find it around Landrum, but if you go to the highest mountain peaks of North and South Carolina, I mean way up there, you might run into a little owl that looks like this, called the saw-whet owl. And it's literally the size of my fist. It's smaller than this creature right here. It's the saw-whet owl. And that's one that actually migrates a little bit, sometimes down the mountain from where it is and down to lower areas during the wintertime and then back up there. But it's more of a northern owl. But screech owls, they pretty much stay at home right where they're at. But so you know that there's a saw-whet owl that lives at high elevations, which actually makes a tooting sound, kind of like a squeaky wheel tooting, kind of a, that's its call, not a hoot, but just an insect-like sound. Very odd, owls are. So that's a screech owl. Now, did anybody notice anything that looks odd about the screech owl other than he's like getting a little nervous, he's panting a little bit, and you know, which I mean, after all, he is a little owl. We're a lot of people in here, but he has a problem. The reason he is in captivity, he's not blind, but you're close. You're on the right track. He has an eye injury. Because what happens with owls, a lot of people don't realize this, owls routinely hunt along the sides of highways. And their daytime counterparts, hawks, do it as well. So they'll be sitting in a tree in an ambush position, and they'll sit there for minutes on end like a statue, just watching, staring. And out on the grass and the brushy areas along a highway, which, you know, every once in a while gets mowed, provides a great hunting ground for little rodents and insects that come there, rabbits for bigger owls, and all kinds of little creatures there. And then, of course, there are some people that drive down the road and throw their trash out. A French fry from McDonald's or something might be in the bag or something like that. And then there's a little refuse there that might draw attention to little animals that come to look for that. So these guys hunt along open areas along the wooded edges of the roads there. And if they spot something, they swoop down to get it because they keep their eyes focused on it. And of course, a speeding car comes by, and a lot of times they get hit and killed. But something that's interesting about screech owls, even though a lot of them do get hit by cars being killed, because they're a little bit smaller, sometimes they have a tendency, I don't know, maybe to just bounce off a vehicle without actually getting completely dead. Like some owls they're completely dead when they're hit. But a lot of times you'll find screech owls next morning, they're sitting there on the side of the road or in the middle of the road, and they're kind of like dazed and like, you know, they have a little bit of a concussion because they hit something, and you know, they're vulnerable and they need a little extra care. Or sometimes they'll break a wing or something like this. This little owl was hit by a car, and what happened with him was he had bleeding into his brain from a concussion, a blow to the head, and the blood went into his eye, which often happens, and sometimes the eye swells up, and then after treatment or something, you know, sometimes it goes down and everything's back to normal, but sometimes it leaves a little damage. So if you look at this owl in the face really closely at just the right time of day, you'll notice that one pupil, which lets in the amount of light, opens and closes like that, like a shutter of a camera. One of them is bigger than the other. And it's not always evident. It just depends on when you're looking at him and the time of day and how much light is coming in. But one eye does not take in the same amount of light as the other. There's a little damage there. And an owl, if you look at an owl, their eyes are forward facing. That's kind of binocular vision. You have binocular vision on the front of your face. And the two images that you're looking at merge between your eyes, just like when you look in a binocular. And when they're hunting something, remember they're hunting in the night, and they're swooping down to grab all kinds of little things, and they have to be spot on to grab something. If one eye does not match the other in the focus and overlap of the vision, they might go off to one side or left or right or something, which means they might not get their food. And then they would maybe slowly starve to death. So this little owl has been deemed unreleasable because of an eye injury, and that's why it's in captivity. But even though it's on the end of a leash, it is not a pet. And owls should never be kept as pets because they don't make good pets, and it's against the law to do that. Okay? But if you were to have a pet owl, screech owl would be a good one because they're kind of small and cute, and I won't say cuddly, but they are cute. Okay. All right, so let's put our screech owl up and learn a bit about some other owls. So he's the smallest owl we're going to visit with today. But we're going to move up in size a little bit to another owl, which is one of my favorite types of owls. Okay? And this is an owl that's pretty common in a lot of areas. And I'm going to change my glove size. So the owl we just saw was a screech owl. Screech owl. The next one we're going to visit with is an owl that's a little larger glove. But one of my very favorite owls of all, a very interesting owl for many different reasons. And this is called, and listen carefully so you'll know how to spell it, a barred owl. In fact, let me get my sign up. Barred owl. Barred owl. B-A-R-R-E-D. It's named for the barred pattern, the little bars that are on there, up and down vertical bars. But there is another owl called the barn owl, which sounds very similar, B-A-R-N. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But the barred owl is a common owl of wooded areas. Just like a screech owl, they roost and lay their eggs and raise their young in hollow tree cavities, but it's a much bigger owl. So they have to have a much bigger tree, deeper forests, deeper woods, bigger trees, that sort of thing. Also, barred owls will sometimes eat screech owls, okay? So we don't want them like seeing each other. I mean, he probably wouldn't do anything, but that little guy would probably be very, very nervous, okay? But a barred owl is a great owl to kind of talk about generally about owls in general, because to me they're just like the perfect textbook example of an owl. All the features that an owl has, you can see on this owl. And one of the things are those big eyes. And notice they're different colors in the screech owls. They're blackish, but they're actually dark brown. believe it or not, if you get really close. And there are actually black pupils in there. You just can't see them, just like two big black holes. And under the right light, it almost looks bluish. It has a little iridescent sheen there. But their eyes are actually dark brown with a very black pupil. And the eyes are very big. Most owls, not all of them, but most owls have very big eyes because big eyes can take in more light at night. And there is some light out there, always a little bit of reflection from the moon, from the stars, that sort of thing. And the bigger the eye is, the more the pupil can expand and take in light, like the shutter of a camera, okay? But also owls have another thing about their face that's very noticeable. It's rounded. And the reason an owl's face is always rounded, some owls have very rounded faces, others not as much, but they all have somewhat of a rounded face. And the reason for that rounded face is because that helps them to hear. Because even though they see very well in the dark, sometimes even in the darkness there are things there that they can't see because maybe it's too far away or it's hidden by brush or leaves or grass or vegetation. And they're hunting all kinds of things. And they can tell where something is even though they can't see it by listening for it because their face acts like a big ear. So if you reach up there and tug on your ear, you've got an external ear that catches sound. You want to catch more sound, make your ear bigger, okay? And these guys have a hole in the head, which is their ear. You have a hole in the head, which is your ear too, but the external ear catches that sound and makes it go down the hole in your head. They don't have that external ear, but they have big ear openings. So to get the sound in, they've got to catch it somehow. It's caught with a rounded face. I always say their face is kind of like a satellite dish, not picking up radio signals from somewhere, but it's picking up sound signals. And it goes down between the feathers, and one of the ear openings is higher than the other. So one is high, one is lower, and in their brain it triangulates where something is between those 2 points, and they can actually fly down. And some owls, like the barn owl I just mentioned a minute ago, the B-A-R-N owl, they will actually fly and hover over the ground, a few feet above the ground, point their faces down at tall grass and brush, and not actually see a mouse or something that's down there, and then swoop down and get it and pull it up with their sharp talons because they pinpointed it with sound. In fact, they've done studies where they take barn owls, put them in a big old giant room that was totally dark, blindfolded them. I don't know how you blindfold an owl, but they would still hunt and find their food because of the sound the little rodents would make as they moved around. Not even squeaking, just the little sounds of their little legs and stuff moving up. So owls hunt a lot of times by sight and also by hearing or a combination of both. And notice this owl doesn't have any feathers that stick up. It doesn't have any horns or plumicorns, what we should call them. No feathers sticking up there. And this owl has great camouflage, light and dark hairs, which kind of match the sun and the shade in the forest there. And even though most owls hunt by night, barred owls sometimes will hunt by daylight if they feel comfortable enough about doing that. There's been more than once where I have seen a barred owl that you maybe disturbed in the woods that flew from one tree to the next, or maybe actually hunting. And particularly if you go around swampy areas where there's lots of big trees and a lot of water, barred owls are very common around water. Swamps have lots of them, but a creek going through a wooded area or river will have more barred owls and other parts have that. Because barred owls not only eat little rodents like many other owls, but they also eat a lot of aquatic things. They love to eat crayfish. That's one of the things they love to eat, crayfish. And they'll maybe catch frogs, fish, and all kinds of things. So whatever they can catch, they'll eat, but they find a lot of things around wetland areas. But the one thing I think about that's really the neatest thing about barred owls, I think, is the sounds they make. Now, if you made a hooting sound earlier, you're getting a little closer to the sound that a barred owl makes. They actually do make a hoot, but it's not just a kind of a hoot that you did. It's a very special kind of hoot. It's a very rhythmic hoot. In fact, many people think it sounds like they're saying, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" Can you say that? Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? And the thing is, if you can sound like an owl, you can, somebody's anxious to get out here. If you can sound like an owl, you can go on what I call an owl prowl. And sometimes you can make an owl appear out of the woods if you want to see an owl, because they're very vocal, they're very curious sometimes. And if you sound like an owl or can play a recording of an owl, sometimes they'll answer you back and sometimes fly in and land on a branch where you can see them. But barred owls do it really well, and they make some interesting sounds. So if you can sound like them, it really works well. But you got to refine your call a little bit. You can't just go out and just do what you did right now. But you got to practice, and you got to go up and pitch a little bit. You got to slur your words together and practice a long time. And then one day, hopefully, you'll sound like a barred owl. He's not impressed. He's heard it before. So, what kind of an owl are you? woo, woo, woo. Or sometimes they just go, woo, woo. Or sometimes they go, woo, woo, and they make monkey-like howls and shrieks. I've literally had people call me and say, do monkeys live in North Carolina? Absolutely not, but barred owls do. In fact, I was down in the zoo in South Carolina one day, and I was walking in the zoo in broad daylight, and I heard, and I said, oh, they must have a barred owl exhibit near. And then I walked around the corner, the monkey exhibit was right there. I mistook the monkeys for a barred owl, but people mistake the barred owl for monkeys. They sound so much similar. And so who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? But also, they also make a sound that's downright spooky. And they make a very high-pitched, human-like scream. But for the same reason you would make a scream if you were frightened by something. And many years ago, I had a very unusual close encounter with a barred owl on the top of a mountain ridge about 2 hours before the sun came up. And I scared a barred owl that was on a low branch above me. I didn't know he was there. In the total darkness, he let out one of those blood-curdling, high-pitched screams like that. One of the most frightening moments of my life. Absolutely terrified me for a moment until I realized what it was. And they make a lot of other sounds. In fact, in the evening, sometimes right before the sun sets and shadows starting to lengthen, in the woods, and it gets that little spooky twilight time, sometimes you'll hear a barred owl way out in the woods somewhere, and he'll go, ooh, 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 and he's way off or something. But sometimes they just kind of like they're warming up, and they go, and make these little weird sounds like that make the hair on the neck stand up, And I always say if you're out in the woods and you hear a sound you cannot explain, probably is a barred owl. And they make a whole host of other weird sounds. In fact, I don't know that he'll do it, but sometimes when I put him back in the carrier here after a program, he starts to quack like a duck. It's kind of his de-stressing thing he does. And by the way, we call this bird Harry. And he's named Harry because somebody brought me this bird a number of years ago because of an injury that he found this bird in the wild, scooped it up, and it was, does anybody see anything wrong with this owl? I mean, he looks pretty good. Got both legs, got 2 good wings, got a nice head, eyes look fine and stuff like that. Whoa! Boy, that was close. Maybe we get more in the middle here. But that's the one thing you remember today when you saw the owl poop. But his problem is not as easy to see, but he was also hit by a car right here in your home state of South Carolina. And a guy I now know that lives near me, he was driving home from a deer hunting trip, and it was right after dark, and he saw this owl sit in the middle of the road, and he looked in bad shape. He didn't try to fly off. His head was tilted to one side. Make a long story short, made some phone calls, found me. Harry, as he nicknamed him because he followed his rehabilitation, his healing process over the weeks and months and years, actually. And he had a head concussion like the other owl did, but his eyes cleared up and it was okay. But his worst injury was that one of his wing tips was almost completely ripped off and just hanging like this. So Harry here, he spent about a month in a big wrapping on his body under antibiotics for his head injury and his other injury to his wing. And we're able to actually save his wingtip, but it doesn't flex quite as well as it should. And sometimes the wing hangs down with a little bit of a droop, which means he can't fly as well as he should be able to. And if you have a little flight disability, even though your eyes might be good, you might miss your mark when you're trying to capture your prey too. You might catch a couple things here and there, you might miss more meals here, and you get a little weaker, you're losing weight, and sooner or later you're a dead bird. So Harry, as we call him, even though we don't know if it's a boy, it could be Harriet, we don't know, spends his life as an educational ambassador, just like the other birds do because of his disability. But I always say his bad luck was our good fortune that we get to see such a unique and beautiful, magnificent bird up close and learn about all these wild creatures in the wild and unusual sounds that barred owls make. They're very entertaining. Also, don't they have that kind of a pussycat look? Doesn't that look like, that looks like a huggable owl, doesn't it? It's got that nice, soft little face there, but trust me, you don't want to go anywhere near this owl. And those talons are very, very sharp, and the beak hurts as well. In fact, that's why we call them owls. They bite you, you go, ow! little joke there. Okay, all right, so let's put up Harry. And before we move on to our next owl, since the owl demonstrated a normal process of nature there using the bathroom, this might be a good time to interject something about owls I think is very unusual that some people know, but some people don't. But it has to do with them and their digestive processes. Okay? As you know, bird poop is kind of messy, kind of runny liquid. And most birds are like that because, well, the way they're designed to process food, you know, and the way it comes out, I don't know how to be delicate about it. It's not a very big opening, very tiny, you know. But think about owls. They sometimes eat animals that they swallow whole, like whole mice. And they eat bones and fur and feathers. And even though they have a great digestive process, a lot of that stuff is indigestible. And they would have to get rid of it. It came out the normal way. Oh, that would hurt. Bones and pieces. So nature's provided them a way of getting rid of that stuff. It's called the owl pellet. And sometimes if you're lucky, you might be at the right place at the right time. And you might find one of these things sitting on the ground under a tree or somewhere like that. Now, if you find a pile of them, it could be dog poop. But if it looks kind of like this dark and it doesn't smell, it's maybe not owl poop, but an owl pellet, which doesn't come out from here, it comes out from here. So routinely, every day or so, an owl gets this funny look on his face for just a moment, and this thing pops up out of his mouth and falls to the ground below. And if you were to take it apart, you would find that it's got all kinds of little bones and fur. In fact, here's a skull of a rodent packed in there. And the black part is the fur that's all compacted down there. You can find little ribs and toenails. And if they've been eating birds, you find little feather bits. In fact, scientists look for owl pellets so they can find out what kind of little creatures live in the woods where owls live, because sometimes it's hard to study them otherwise. So they look for owl pellets. And you can dissect them, and you can actually buy them. You can buy them from a scientific supply place. They come disinfected, they come wrapped in a little aluminum foil like that. And usually when you get an owl pellet, it comes from an owl called the barn owl. Now, I don't have a barn owl with me today, but I want to show you a picture of one, because the barn owl is one that's confused with a barred owl, but it has a different sounding spelling of the name. But like its name implies, it does live around barns. It lives in roost in behind hay bales, maybe in a farm loft or something like that, any other old building that's out there that's not used very much, where they can hide. They lay their eggs and then they'll raise their young, and then at night they come out over the farmers' fields and fly looking for little rodents and little other kind of little creatures they feed on. And they have smaller eyes, have a really rounded face, and they hover and swoop down and grab their feet. They got really long legs. They're a little smaller than a barred owl, slimmer, very much white on the underneath, but they have this salt and pepper and cinnamon color on their back of their bodies. So really pretty owl. But since they actually roost in old barns and buildings that are sheltered, when they pop up their pellets, they just drop to the ground and then they dry out, and then you can come 6 months later and find a pile of pellets that are there. If you're a barred owl or one of these other owls that roost out in a tree, your pellet falls to the ground and just rots away very quickly. So people will commercially go into places where barn owls are found, because sometimes they'd be very common around these places, and they pick up those pellets and they sell them to scientific supply places, and then you buy them and you go into your school classroom or something like that in science class, and you get something like this, a bone chart, and you get a pellet and you pick it apart with tweezers and you match your little bones are in there, and you learn about the anatomy, how animals are put together, and what kind of things owls like to eat. And you can look at all the illustrations. You could had a little bit of glue and a lot of time in hand. You could glue together a whole skeleton, I guess, if you wanted to. And there's a certain age when people find that's very fascinating to do. I'm at that age right now. Okay, and it's really interesting because, like, a screech owl has tiny little pellets, like here's a pellet from a screech owl, a tiny little thing, and it's got a lot of insect parts in it. You know, so depending on what size owl you are and what you eat, you cough up different size pellets, you know. So this has lots of bug parts in it because this is something that screech owls like to feed on. So owl pellets are pretty interesting, and they're actually very clean, they don't stink, and they're a scientific study. Maybe in a science class, if you haven't already done it at school somewhere, maybe you'll get a chance to take apart an owl pellet, okay? I highly recommend it. Okay, well, moving on, we have another owl to visit with. So we saw the barred owl. We learned a bit about screech owl. We talked a little bit about the saw-whet owl, which is the smallest owl, which is found in the mountainsides near here. And we talked about the barn owl and how they cough up pellets and that sort of thing. But there's another owl I'd like to take out now. It's the one that's been really nervous. And notice his carry is a little bit bigger. And he's a little bit bigger owl. Now, you see the silhouette down here? Let's see. This is the barred owl when it flies, the one we just saw. So really big when it flies. This is a silhouette of this next one when it flies. A whole lot bigger, okay? And it also, this, if you listen, you may hear this bird. Hear it hissing? It's a very defiant bird. This bird hates me. But I've had this bird for about 20 years. And every day when I go into an enclosure to feed it or do whatever I do, it looks at me with this big staring yellow eyes. And I can tell it hates me. Because I'm a human. And it's an owl. An owl should be in the wild. In fact, this owl doesn't like me to hold it either. So when I get this owl out, I'm going to actually put on this perch here where it'll hopefully be a little more comfortable. But it'll still hate me. But it'll still be there where you can see it. Where you can see it, hopefully. But this is the largest owl that's found in our area. Sometimes nicknamed the tiger of the night because it's such a powerful predator. In fact, it's such a powerful predator that, oh yeah, it'll eat little mice and bugs and stuff like that. But it also routinely likes to feed on things that weigh twice what it does. It doesn't beat around the bush. It can eat things much heavier than it is because it's such a powerful predator. And this is also one of the more famous types of owls in our country. And everybody's probably heard of it. Raise your hand if you'd heard of a saw-whet owl before I mentioned it. Only a few of you, some of you. But I'll be willing to bet you everybody's heard of this creature. It's called the great horned owl. Let's walk here for just a moment. And then we'll put her on a perch over there. And I do say her, we think this is a female because she's pretty big. And her name is, get ready, her name is Elvira. Like Elvira, but Elvira. Okay, all right. And Elvira hates me, okay, because she's a big owl and she's very defiant. And doesn't that just look like she's looking right through you? Like if looks could kill, you'd all be dead right now if that owl looking at you. Yeah, those big yellow eyes. You know, when you look at this owl right here, it looks a little bit like another owl we met because it also has these things that stick up called plume corn. What does that remind you of another owl we saw earlier? The screech. People see a little screech owl, they think it's a baby great horned owl, which gets its name from these things that stick up there. But see, this owl was very upset, so they were laying back. It's ticked off, but I can manipulate it. And if the owl is kind of relaxed and alert, they'll stick them up like that, which looks really cool, doesn't it? They're a cool looking owl. But not all owls have those things there. So we're going to put Elvira over here for a moment. Behave, Elvira. Get yourself comfortable. That doesn't look comfortable. Get out here. Oh, that's comfortable, facing the wrong way. We can fix it. Okay. Now, you know, this reminds me, one of the questions I get the most about owls is, how far can they turn their heads? Does anybody know?
All the way around.
All the way around. Let's test that. This owl is looking at me. And this owl is looking at me right now. This is the way an owl should be, with a head facing forward like yours. But as I move around, this owl has gone down 90 degrees. You can do that. You can turn your head 90 degrees. But as I keep going, it's now 180 degrees. The head's on backwards. And if it wanted to, it could go another extra 90 degrees. But watch what will happen when I go a little further. It'll probably go back the other way. Yep. And because they do that, people think they do it really fast. People think their head spun completely around. But they do have the ability to turn their head 3/4 of a circle. That's 270 degrees if you're keeping track with your math. But mostly they don't do it very often. But they definitely can do 180 really easy. Head's on completely backwards. It doesn't even hurt, does it? But the reason they can do that is because their eyes have no ability to move in their sockets. They have these huge eyes, they're glued into place. And even though they'll blink their eyes, they even have an extra eyelid that comes, a clear eyelid called a nictitating membrane, or a clear third eyelid. Because they have to move their head to look any direction, nature's provided with extra vertebra in their neck bone. And so they can turn their head 3 times further than we can. But they cannot do simply what you can stay in one place and roll your eyes up and down around. They can't do that at all. If they got to look one place, their eyes go with the head. Always open and staring like that. Like I said, that looks could kill. That bird's got to look in there. And panting is kind of a stress type thing. They don't have sweat glands like we do, so they get hot, they pant a little bit, or they get a little stressed out, they pant a little bit, you know. But the longer she is up there, the more she kind of calms down. But after all, we are human beings, and she's an owl. And it's just an unusual situation for a bird like this to be comfortable to just sit there, sitting still, with all these people in the room. But Elvira's been around, she's done it a few times. Even though she doesn't like it, she calms down after a while. And if I take Harry the bird out, he actually sometimes goes to sleep. He's much more comfortable with it. Yeah, I've had that owl for about 20 years. They live a long time. In a while, you wouldn't find a predator living that long. But sometimes in captivity, these birds can live 15, 20, 25 years or even more if they're lucky. But we call that guy a tiger knight because they do routinely eat things much bigger and heavier than they are. Now, how much do you think that bird weighs? Any guesses? How much do you think it might weigh? How many? 20 pounds. What do you think?
100.
100 pounds. 5. Yeah, no, okay. If you think that thing is 100 pounds, how much do you think I weigh? Oh, I better not just load the question. Never mind. Actually, this owl only weighs about 3 pounds. And that's not a lot when you think about it. It's big if you're catching a fish, a 3-pound fish, that's pretty cool. But owls are very lightweight because birds have lightweight bones so they can fly. They have hollow spaces in the bones. They're not completely hollow. But this owl has a lot of power in its lift of its wings. And as you see what the wingspan of them look like, they can be like 5 feet wingspan. Off with it because they're so strong and powerful. And even though they eat small things, as I mentioned, they will eat larger things. And you know what one of the favorite foods of great horned owls are in this area? Skunks. They love to eat skunks. You say, wait a minute, how can anything eat a skunk? Don't they smell bad? They do, but guess what? Owls don't have a sense of smell. And even though in humans our sense of smell and taste are tied together, in owls it's not. So a lot of times if an owl is injured or something that I get in, if it's a great horned owl, a lot of times they smell like skunks when I get them in. It's like pretty loud. But anything about the size of a skunk will do if they can't find a skunk. That means little cats, little bitty dogs. Not because it's a cat or dog, it's just because it's an animal approximating the size of things they like to feed on. So my advice is, you live in great horned owl country, and if you're listening to me and you live around, you are in great horned owl country. Don't let your cats roam out at night. Don't let your dogs go out at night if they're little like that. There's probably a great horned owl won't get them, but many other things exist out there that could harm them as well. And of course, your wild animal, your pet animal could actually harm a wild animal as well. But they have been known to eat cats sometimes. And in fact, I heard a story about a great horned owl that lived in a park. And sometimes they live very close to people. They're very adaptable. That lived in a park somewhere, and it routinely ate people's cats in the neighborhood. And if your cat was missing, all you had to do was go to the park and go underneath the tree where it roosted. And if your cat had a collar, you might find it underneath the tree at some point in time. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it makes for a good story. But tiger knight, very, very powerful predator. And the gripping power of his feet is almost that of an eagle. They're considered to be the most powerful bird of prey in the Western Hemisphere other than an eagle because of the strength of their feet. Now, does anybody notice anything wrong with this bird that might look like it would affect his ability or her ability to live in the wild? Does anybody notice anything wrong? You think you see something wrong? What do you think it is? Okay, that's normal. That's normal. That's a good guess. What do you think? Oh, you say one of his wings is smaller. You're on the right track. You're on the right track. It's temper. Not a very mild temper, is it? But you're on the right track about the wings. This bird has suffered an injury that happens to other birds, but it happens more to great horned owls than any other owl. And this is important, I think, to hear this because a lot of you live around this area, I'm assuming. Nobody came from like Florida to this program, did you? Or from over in Tennessee or New York or no. Now, most people probably live around South Carolina, up North Carolina. In this area you're around here, there's a lot of pastures and fields, aren't there? Some of you may have horses or something like that. you have fences that keep them in. If you have a barbed wire fence, I can't tell you to get rid of it, but I sure would advise you get rid of it. Barbed wire fences are deadly to wildlife. And this great horned owl was found tangled in a barbed wire fence. Because barbed wire fences, horses and cows don't want to go near them because they're prickly. And they're efficient, and that's good. But then the grass grows up, and they can't graze there. Provides a little travel corridor for skunks, rodents, rabbits, anything. And then owls that are hunting at night, they spot those animals there. They come swooping down out of a tree, and they spread their wings to slow down. They put their big talons out to grab the thing, and then their wings snag onto a barbed wire fence, and they hang there a lot of times until they die. And it happens a lot. And Elvira here suffered such a bad wing injury. She was found tangled in a barbed wire fence. The people brought the barbed wire fence with her to me. I had to dig the barbed wire out of her wing, and it was in a joint here, and the bone and the tendons were exposed. It took 6 months just for the wound to fill in. And this owl can't fly at all. She can flap her wings. She can jump up from a perch to here, but she couldn't fly from one end of this room or land on something up higher. Like if she was on the ground, she probably would not be able to get to where she was. She just can't do it because of permanent injury to her wing there. And she was lucky because she was found. And I have more than one owl that's been found tangled in a barbed wire fence, and others hang there until they die. And it's just a terrible, terrible thing. We can do something about barbed wire, but we can't really do much about our cars on highways. We're going to have highways. Maybe we can slow down a little bit. But the point is that owls and other birds of prey, and even other animals as well, whether you're a bird or prey or whatever, we have so many highways, human-made obstacles and things like that cause a problem for owls and other wild creatures. And we don't mean to hurt these animals. It's just about by being a human, we sometimes do. So we need to be a little careful about the way we contain our domestic animals with fences and how fast we drive down the road and how much habitat we save for wild creatures to live in so they don't have to hunt very close to people. But the reality is we share the habitat with these animals, and they often have to be close to humans because so much of the wild habitat is gone. And one thing you can do to help owls is, how would you like to have your own owl? But then I say you couldn't do that. But you can help owls. And there's a way you kind of have an owl of your own, but not quite. It's by helping them find a place to live. And this is a screech owl house right here. And some owls that we saw today were cavity nests. Now, this type of owl might nest in a cavity, but also it might nest, take an old red-tailed hawk nest, something, add a few sticks and lay their eggs there. So they'll have a more traditional nest, but not much of a nest. But other owls like to live in hollow tree cavities, and screech owls, since they live close to people, they're always looking for a home or a roost. You can build or buy a screech owl house like that, which is like a big oversized bluebird house. Put it on a tree on the edge of your yard if you have some woods there. And a lot of times screech owls move in. In fact, they like them so much, I've known more than one person that's actually gone out and put a ladder on a tree, walked up that ladder to put their screech owl house, and maybe had a phone call they had to take or run back in the house for something, so I'll finish it tomorrow. Next day, the screech owl's already in the house. That happens sometimes, not to everybody, but it happens because they're always looking for a place to lay their eggs or roost during the wintertime. So you could have a screech owl box up. You can even make one for barred owls, but it's really huge. But particular screech owls that live close to people, you put that up in your yard. You have little screech owls there, and sometimes during the wintertime when it's cold, an owl that will roost in that during the winter, he'll come up and he'll sit in the opening there with his teeth out, sunning himself. And it's such a cute little thing to see them. That happens quite a bit. And sometimes you'll be there when a little young one's fledged out of the nest and go flying. One time I had some that came out of one of my screech owl boxes, and the young came out and they were very curious. And as I walked by, they followed me through the woods like I was a Pied Piper. And they were following, in the little branches, they're following me as I went through the woods. It's the coolest little thing. They were curious. So you can help owls, provide a little habitat. Leave a little wild area on your property that grows up where rodents and other creatures might be. And those are some of those neat creatures that are out there. We don't get to see them very often. And by the way, I didn't mention what a great horned owl sounds like, but actually I did earlier. That's the one you hear in the TV commercials and TV shows all the time. That's why everybody thinks all owls sound like that, because the great horned owl sounds like that, and it's the most mimicked owl call because it sounds just like the old hoot owl that you would think of. Okay? So while our owl sits there for this moment, while she's being kind of behaved for a moment, I haven't had a chance to take any questions or anything, so maybe we'll spend just a couple of moments. If you have a question about the owls or something, and I'll take a few questions, then we'll kind of wind down our program. Yes?
Carlton, how many rodents
Don't get too.
How many rice,
Yeah.
how many mice do you have to have every week to feed your?
Okay, these owls eat, sometimes I pick up roadkill squirrels and things like that. Also, they're fed a meat products made for bird of prey in captivity, plus so I have different sources of stuff, but it takes a lot to feed them.
How do you pay for that?
My wallet. Yep, it's all out of my pocket, so yeah, yes.
Mine seem to have like an owl.
Ooh, cool, neat owl. That's a little bitty owl, I like that, yes.
How many mice does an owl eat in one day?
Well, as many as he can catch. Something like a barn owl, something might eat a dozen or so a day, or maybe only is lucky enough to get 3. It just depends. Sometimes they go several days without eating. It just depends on how many things they can find. Yes.
What kind of owl makes the longest, most eerie sound?
Say that again.
The longest, most eerie,
It might be a barred owl. It depends where you live. It's hard to say without actually hearing it. But
Whenever I was little, just down in Blue Ridge, I grew up with a lot, I think probably a variety of different.
Right, yeah.
I remember seeing them and hearing them.
Right, yeah. And also sometimes young owls will make certain sounds to their parents. Like there's a begging cry that young great horned owls make to their parents that you don't normally see in recordings and stuff. It's a really odd screeching, drawn out sound. And great horned owls actually raise their young. They pair up in November and December. They lay their eggs in January. Their young hatch about Groundhog Day in February, and they spend the rest of the spring and summer into the early autumn months raising a baby. And then the mother and father in the woods, and the baby starts flying around, but it's still under the care of the parents being taught to hunt. And they make some really odd sounds. So sometimes really odd sounds that may be like owl sounds could be young owls talking to the parents a lot of times. So I'm not sure exactly what you, yeah.
How fast does he fly?
As far as miles per hour, not that fast because they're more of an ambush creature. But when they fly, they have little fringes that muffle the wind on their feathers. So when they fly with a totally silent flight, ghost-like. So they can really sneak up on things. So they're not really fast to catch stuff there, but they come swooping down kind of low and quickly like that, but not as fast as some hawks and things like that.
How many owls do you have?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't bring them all, but 4, 5, 6, something like that. I have like 3 other great horned owls, another barred owl, several other screech owls, and stuff like that. Yes?
Would a field be a good place to put a owl house?
A field? No, it needs to be in the woods. Yeah, on a tree somewhere would be good. But it could be facing a field, because that's where they would hunt for mice and things. Okay, that's all right. Okay, yes?
Do owls and hawks, will they share territory?
They will, because one is the nighttime equivalent of the other. Yeah, so they normally don't bother each other. They just hunt different things at different times of the day. But they'll share territory.
So they don't compete?
They are competing for the same food sources basically, but they're not usually hunting at the same time. One's more nocturnal than the other.
What about hawks and bats?
Hawks and bats. What's the question about hawks and bats? Whether they compete with each other?
They'll eat the same place.
Yeah. Yeah, well, hawks will sometimes normally they won't eat a bat because bats come out and eat them, but sometimes owls will eat a bat. But bats are kind of hard to catch. So most of our owls are ambush, and it's hard for them to catch a bat. Let's say,
Bats on my place.
yeah.
We got a pond at the duck house. And one time there was a screech owl that built a nest in there.
Right.
With the babies, as far as them getting out, they didn't have anywhere to go but in the water.
Yeah. That could be a problem. Sometimes they'll fly right out of the box and it'll be okay, but sometimes they drop out earlier. They could drop in the water. But also wood duck boxes can be put away from the water, and wood ducks will actually go sometimes 100 yards or more and roost in the woods, and you don't always have to put it in the water. But that might be an alternative. Or just put up some screech owl houses. So they both have a place. A couple more questions, and then what I'll do, I'll stay a little bit later if people want to stay and talk a little bit more.
What are the wingspans on the largest owl?
On the largest owl, like we have, would be a great horned owl is actually our heaviest owl, pretty much in the lower 48, so to speak here. And it's what you see there, up to about 5 feet.
5 feet.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Carlton, why do we not have burrowing owls?
We just don't have the right habitat, I guess. They're down in Florida and other places. It's just not a thing that's found its way here yet. I guess that could change with changing habitat, changing climate. Things that could happen, Yeah, but they're just not an owl that's suited for this area, I guess. And a couple more, and then we'll wind it down. Yes. Oh, okay. Question, real loud.
We have a question of how they eat.
How they eat?
Because we saw one actually scoop up prey and come across a road, and it was clearly alive. What
You're
it
right.
had.
Yeah.
So how does it go from that stage to?
Yeah. So usually they grab with their talons, and if it's wiggling or fighting or something, a lot of times they'll bite it. Get what are called a coup de grace with their beak or something like that. Or they might fly off and take it somewhere else and then kill it or something like that. But a lot of times, as soon as they grab it with those talons, not only to grab it, sometimes those talons go into whatever it is. Sometimes things are dead almost instantaneously. But it depends on what they're feeding on. Yes.
So if we find an owl or another raptor that's injured,
Yes.
we're not
What you can do if you find an injured raptor, that's a great question. If you find an injured raptor, what you should do, I'm trying to find, what do I do with my gloves? Oh, here it is. Find an injured raptor. If it's a raptor, pick it up and throw it in the trash. If it's a raptor, you can call, usually if you call a sheriff's department or something like that, usually they know who wildlife rehabilitators are. If you're not sure, you can always go on websites and Google something, wildlife rehabilitator, South Carolina, or something like that, and you'll usually get some information about who's the licensed wildlife rehabilitators. Sometimes if you call a zoo, a veterinarian's office, or something like that, they'll usually know who the folks are that deal with the wild creatures like that. But if you find an injured raptor and you need help with it right away and you can't find anybody, just throw a towel over it or something, blanket, get into a cardboard box or something like that, and kind of get out of the situation. But make sure it really needs your help first, that it's really injured. Sitting in the highway is doing like that, it's probably hit by a car. But be careful, even an injured bird of prey like that can still fight back with its talons and stuff like that. But you can make a few phone calls, get on the internet, you'll be able to find a wildlife rehabilitator at some point in time, and if you're diligent enough, and then they'll help you out with it. And not all wildlife rehabilitators are licensed to work with birds of prey, so just that's something to keep in mind as well. But you as a citizen, you are allowed to transport a bird of prey that's injured to a wildlife rehabilitator, or hold it for like a 24-hour period or something like that until you can find a wildlife rehabilitator, so nobody's going to put you in jail or fine you $10,000 or something like that for helping a bird of prey like that. But if you kept it for the next 6 months, then you could get in trouble. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put what's her name? Alvira. We'll put her back up. And then if anybody wants to stay after the program, I'll just stay up here and answer a few more questions if you want to. And I'll just hang around as long as you hang around. So I hope you enjoyed the program. Hope you learned something useful. Hope you had a little fun as well. But I hope you learned a whole new line of respect for these wild creatures, masters of the night. Owls are amazing animals, I think. So thank you for allowing me to come. Thanks for coming to the program.